Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Well, welcome everyone to the Stoa. And Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue at the knife's edge of this moment. And today we are joined here by Tyson Yunkaporta. He wrote a book called Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. And here at the Stoa, it seems a lot of our conversations center around saving the world, solving the meta crisis. What is it that we can do? Where do we have agency as a community? And Tyson's book, which I learned about through Jim Rutt's podcast, it's been just really rich and thought-provoking and calling me into deeper participation with the world around me, the earth, the sand, the soil, the air. And so we invited him here to the Stoa, and we're really lucky to have him here. And I know a lot of you have been reading the book or listening to the book, which is an incredible audio performance, by the way. I really appreciate when an author reads their own book, but especially when it's read like I could imagine myself sitting around a campfire with you. So I really recommend the audiobook, even if you've read the book. And there's gonna be a lot of good questions coming in, I imagine. So I wanna make as much space and time for that as we can. And I think I'll, well, Tyson, I'll say welcome and invite you to say hello. And if you have any opening comments or anything, and I would love to invite that.
Hey, how's it all going? I don't know if you're all in the States or you're from lots of places around the world, you know, but yeah, it's always good to think about the First Peoples where you are. And so, yeah, it's tricky on Zoom because it's always multiple places at once. Yeah, but I'm on the land of the Bunurong mob here in Melbourne. And Arnie Gale, Kunwara Dawson is the person who is the senior elder who gives me permission to be here and, you know, do this podcast and do this work here. So I'm pretty much coming under her law. Yeah, and so she gives me a slap from time to time if I go the wrong way, I say the wrong thing. It's funny because I say some terrible things sometimes, she didn't say anything. But then, like somewhere in my book, I refer to wattle, a wattle spirit as male, and she flogged me for that. Like, she's like, "No, that's female." I'm gonna, yeah. Anyway, she's got a big stick, and she flogs me with it. Yeah. So yeah, just get grounded in the idea of the first peoples there and the old people who are still in custodial relationship with your place and the big sticks that they carry, especially the women, because they'll just flog you. Yeah, and that's it.
Thank you. Welcome.
It's not a standard acknowledgement, but
for all those of you that have questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat, and I will be calling on you to unmute yourself and ask your question. If you would like me to ask your question for any reason, then you can say so, and I'll read your question for you. Tyson, when you said permission, I felt this sort of like spark in me, like a recalling of maybe a feeling that I sometimes seek out when in the way that I've been learning about the world and seeking wisdom and new ideas and deeper ideas and rich wisdom traditions. I find sort of a sense in myself wherever I am in the world to want to, know more, learn more about the indigenous cultures, and also have a more participatory experience. And I found in myself this question that I've been asking myself and now those around me, how I might seek wisdom and in a more participatory way with the indigenous cultures on the land that I'm at and where I find. I went on a hike the other day and I found this trail called like Red Ochre Falls or something, and I found these pots of of red ochre, like in the spring coming from the ground. And there's these signs sort of illustrating how they might have been used by indigenous cultures. And then there's people standing around taking photos. And I had this sense like, what would it be like to play in there and have that experience? But it felt to me off limits.
Mm.
And so my curiosity was like, what is the way in which I can, with wisdom and respectfully, and learn about this in a more participatory way? And so that's what my question circles around. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of like I know in the States there's a lot of similar problems to here, that when so as Indigenous people, when we try to go and do our thing, you know, on the land in places, especially national parks and things like that, there's a lot of hostility. And so we found that we have to kind of sneak in there when there's no one around, and then hope that the rangers don't get to us. You know, so like, I don't know, I just imagine in that scene that you're talking about, you know, people just sort of waiting for all the tourists to leave or all the visitors to leave so they could come in and get some ochre. You know, yeah, I just yeah, there's a big mob to the north a bit that I've done a lot of sort of ceremony and things with, and yeah, there's they got stopped in the middle of a ceremony, and it was men's ceremony, you know, and there were like female park rangers coming in and berating them and putting out their fire and, like, you know, wanted to give them fines and all this sort of stuff because they had their special fire going in that place. And it's like, and the rangers were going, no, you've destroyed that heritage site. You know, that ancient fireplace is Australian heritage, you know, and you've wrecked it by lighting a fire in the same place, on the fireplace where your ancestors have done ceremony forever. You know, you've put a fire there, and that's wrecked the heritage status of that, because now it's been used recently. It's ruined, you know. Yeah, that was huge. So, I mean, that was a terrible thing. There were a lot of men, I don't know, we were all really angry about that. And I wasn't there for that incident, thank God, you know, because I'm a bit of a hothead. And they, I don't know, so they all got together and decided, and we called in fellas from all over. So all over the continent, we called in, we're like, you know, we were trying to get hundreds and hundreds of men all together in one place, you know, to do that ceremony, and then, you know, to resist and fight if anyone came in and tried to kick us off from doing it. But I don't know. So I don't know, the government did, you know, what they always do to quell rebellions. I mean, there's one or two things they'll do. They'll throw you in jail, or they'll give you money. And so they gave somebody some money, and I don't know, they made it into, like, they took like this big uprising, you know, restless natives was going to happen, you know. So what they did was they made it into like a festival. They funded all these stalls and tents and and, you know, all these things coming in, and yeah, it ended up just being this big event instead, and that was the way they controlled it. Yeah, it's really interesting. There's this kind of jujitsu happening, you know, between the traditional law of your first peoples and the continuation, the continuity of that law. There's kind of this jujitsu happening between that and the settler state, always, and this kind of constant erasure that's going on. And you know, whether it's done nicely like that, or whether it's done, you know, by, like, you know, shooting people or locking them up or whatever, it's always an act of violence. You know, so it is really tricky. It's not like, you know, wow, I wonder what this ochre used to be used for. You know, I'll bet you there's people still using that, but they have to come in when there's no one around and sort of steal their own ochre the state. Yeah, that's a kind of dark way to start this thing. We'll try to move towards something a bit more fun.
Yeah.
You can get me in a bad mood and I'm just going to be all no good.
Well, anybody that has questions, please do drop them in the chat and I'll call on you to ask your question. And Joe Rivera, you have a question. And if you would like to unmute yourself and ask it, I'd love to invite you to do so.
Yeah, for sure. You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. To keep up the high spirits and talks about violence and death, I had a question, Tyson, about your book. So it's sort of putting your book in conversation with the work of René Girard, who I've read recently, about violence. And a key insight of his work, if you've read it or if you're familiar, is that there's an existential threat to violence as we're experiencing it in the West. If he's right, then our sort of repression of local violence will result in a buildup and a release of violence at a much larger level. And like, you know, the 20th century and the atrocities that happened then is sort of the perfect example of what it could look like. And, you know, the next time that happens, it'll be even worse, according to his theory. But the solution he proposes, which seems to be pretty popular in the sort of game B crowd that, you know, a lot of us sort of walk in, is to make sacred all violence in order to sort of break free of that mimetic cycle that puts the entire species at risk. In your book, you take the opposite perspective, it seems, sort of calling for swift and memorable violence at a local level, but also immediate forgiveness, which also sounds like highly attractive. And I was just wondering more if you could sort of expand upon the sort of punishment system that the first peoples use, and how that works and where you see that interacting with sort of Girard's theory that we need to basically abolish violence.
Well, it's not really a punishment system. Punishment is sort of a small part of it. But yeah, policing is not something that's just conferred into the hands of a few powerful people. It's something that, like violence, like everything, like governance, it's distributed throughout the system, and it keeps moving in that kind of dynamic subordination. You know, so depending on the context, the knowledge that's needed, but also particularly the place and which family or which person speaks for that place of where you might be, you know, that's where that authority is. Now with the violence, it is highly ritualized and highly rule governed. And it looks like chaos, but it's not. You know, it's highly rule governed. So basically it minimizes the damage, the physical damage that's done. And then there's a lot of follow-up protocols as well. So for example, down here where I'm staying now, there was a protocol in the old days of, you know, anybody that you injured in a battle or in a fight, which was highly controlled, that you would be responsible for their care afterwards. So, you know, it's really hard to like maim someone up really badly if you know that you're going to be responsible for their care. You're only going to want to hurt them badly enough for, you know, okay, well, I can look after this guy for 2 weeks. I'm going to give him 2 weeks worth of damage because that's all I'm prepared to do, you know. You know, there's other things I mentioned in the book, like, you know, with knife fighting, the winner of the knife fight has to be cut up exactly the same as the loser. You know, so the person with the most cuts is the loser, but then the winner, like, they stand them side by side and they look where the cuts are and they cut them so that both of them have exactly the same cuts. And yeah, I've participated in that one, and it's very hard. It's a very hard thing to do, to cut somebody else if you're going to get the same cut. And I think that's the point of it. You realize that you're just hurting yourself, you know. So there's a lot of things like that, and different places have different ideas. So then there's also there's the other mob to the north of here, who they developed a martial arts system based on the way kangaroos fight. You know, because they don't get really badly injured, but it's incredibly violent. But there's rules, you know, protocols, and so there's this big explosion of violence, and everybody walks away from it unscathed, but they get it out of their system, you know. Yeah, and I suppose you have to do that. look, I don't know if you ever come across the work of an anthropologist called Napoleon Chagnon. He did this seminal study of the Yanomami Indians in the Amazon, who he called the most violent people on earth. And so he videotaped, hundreds of hours of footage of just big brawls in the community, people fighting. And I've watched quite a bit of that. And it's funny, they seem to be wrestling mostly and like screaming and writhing around. There's not much physical damage being done. But then if you look into his work, you see that, I don't know, is anyone here come across the continuum concept? That book? So that was exactly the same people, but studied by a woman who was looking at childbirth and child-rearing practices. She reports a very different experience of those people, very peaceful, very happy people because of her approach to that study. But this fella, he came in and he gave them gifts immediately, like machetes and axes and things like this. And those people hadn't seen steel before. And so they started fighting over those gifts, and he filmed them fighting. But it's funny, you see them with the machetes, but they don't use the machetes in the fight. They're mostly wrestling. And anyway, he decided, so he got them to, in exchange, he got them to report to him all of their genealogies. So who was related to whom. And then after they reported that to him, he fed it into the computer to do an analysis of their kinship system to see who was related to whom, and then spent thousands of hours watching the videotapes. And he noted a pattern whereby, people who were related to each other would look after each other in the fights. And people who were closely related wouldn't fight each other, and they'd support each other against other opponents. And his argument was that these people were so primitive that they couldn't possibly hold all that genealogical information in their heads. Only a computer could do that. So therefore, they were being driven by something unconscious. Even though they'd told him their genealogies, that's how he found out about it. He said they couldn't possibly know it. It was so weird. But people took his work seriously. And so out of that came the idea of that selfish gene idea, the idea that people are machines who have no real conscious choice about their behavior, but it's just your genetics are driving you, as an individual agent in the world. You're going to be selfish because your genes are selfish, and all they want to do is replicate. So your behaviors will be driven by that. And that all of those behaviors can be figured out with algorithms on a computer. And I mean, what that gave rise to next, hey? All the neoliberalism and social fragmentation, that idea of the human being as a consumer that can be manipulated. And that, the entire system that's developed over the last 30, 40 years has been around that idea. So that the idea of liberalism, the idea of freedom and liberty that's been imposed on the world, is this idea of individuals going around fulfilling whatever their wants and desires are. And that somehow in the aggregate, that forms the invisible hand of the marketplace, and the market will solve everybody. You don't need community, you don't need family, you don't need governance. It's the marketplace that'll sort it out. But then also that within that, people can be manipulated, into behaving in certain ways, through their algorithms. And what that's turned into with social media and all of the rest, all these mobile phone devices, all that sort of thing. It goes right back to that old asshole anthropologist bloody projecting his weird ideas onto indigenous people. And like I said, if you read the continuum concept, a female anthropologist would see a completely different thing when she goes in and she's looking for child rearing practices. She sees a very different culture there with very different conclusions. Yeah, sorry, that was a really long answer, but it's kind of important because it establishes this idea that the primitive is something that, you know, civilization must project its own narratives back onto, you know, in order to support this idea of progress, this idea of growth, this idea of development. So, you know, the myth of progress can only exist with a mythological, you know, Paleolithic past of brutality and simplicity and stupidity, and the fittest survive, you know. So they get all the desirable traits, like, you know, like, I don't know, stuff like, you know, rape is normal, and, you know, secretly every woman wants to get raped. I mean, you must have seen those studies, you know, and they just project it, like, they say they're being scientific, but they're projecting a narrative backwards that they have no proof for, that just, yeah, well, that goes back to caveman times when everybody was raped. It's just, you know, and they walk around in nature and it's just like, you know, oh, it's all these plants and animals just raping each other. That's just the natural thing. But as human beings, we're rising above that. We've developed, we have progress, and, you know, so we have to control ourselves and we have to control everybody. Otherwise, it's just going to be endless rape and murder. It's just, we all know that's not true. But for some reason, we're all going along with the narrative, and the narrative is bullshit, and we know it. Anyway, that guy's dead now, that anthropologist. If he wasn't, I'd be paying him a visit. Yeah. Did somebody say something about carving? And I just got to grab something. Next one, question. Keep talking. Let's yarn. Hello.
Tyson Wagner, are you there with us?
I'm here. Do you hear me now?
Yep.
Great. Sorry about that. Maya, will you ask your question?
Hi, Tyson. My name's Maya. I'm in Wurundjeri country, just upriver from you in Warburton.
Hey, we're in Warburton. I'll be damned.
Yeah, not far from Project 3488. Mark told me the rumours.
Hey, yeah, that's where we're getting married.
I know. Congratulations.
Now that I can afford it.
I've lived here for 10 years in this beautiful mountain village. There's the mountains outside the window there. And I came here after walking the length of the Yarra River, as the song line there, following some deep journeys to try to come home here and do my best to listen to country and learn about place, and really put down the roots and do the work. And it's been pretty amazing. But one thing, I just loved your book. What I really appreciated was your explanation of how a whole community works to hold wisdom and knowledge. And, you know, as a whitey in a village mainly of colonizers who all have very, very different narratives about place and belonging, how to sort of work as a community to develop collective meaning. So I've been running community pilgrimages to visiting all the mountains and the river and so forth. So taking the kids and every year climbing higher and sort of growing into these places and really making commitment through coming into relationship with country. But the difficulty, sorry, I'll try and get the point. The difficulty between my own deep personal experience of being in country, that's very powerful, compared to trying to hold space for community connection to places when we don't have much shared ritual or meaning about country and the depth of relationship with the more than human world that is possible. So
I know what you mean.
I'm interested in your thoughts about how to develop collective connection in such a fractured kind of world.
Yeah. Well, it comes out of the first one. I mean, it's easy enough to control your own behaviors, you know, or to influence yourself. You know, despite what the studies of the Yanomami Indians tell us, you can actually decide to walk along the river. And it's not your selfish genes making you do it, you know. But when you're doing that, you're interacting with a dynamic, complex, self-organizing, sentient system that's filled with sentient human and non-human entities, you know, other than humans. And, you know, and there's something of a, it's not a surrender, but it's an acceptance. You know, when you start to, you obviously have reached that, where you come into that place and you become part of a field that is observing itself. Yeah, so you're no longer standing outside of the field observing it and going, oh, this is an ecosystem and this is connected to this and this is connected to this, and I understand this ecosystem now. You're actually in it, and you're not trying to observe it. You're just part of a system that's observing itself, and you're accepting those flows of information. Hey, Tyson flows. You're getting those flows of information coming through, and you're not trying to accumulate it and walk away with a hypothesis or a story to share or anything like that. You're just letting it come through you, and then letting it go and letting it change you, letting it transform you, and you're adapting to that place. And all kinds of entities of spirit and you know, little parasites, microscopic things, they're all coming into you there in that place, and they're changing you and making you part of that place. And Warburton is as good a place as any to do it. It's probably the, you know, one of the few sort of living places left in around this horrendous city where we are here. I mean, and it's horrible. This city, you know, built on a destroyed swamp is is really terrible. Yeah, but see, that's that sort of individual work. But I mean, it starts out like that, but you're really coming into a collective anyway. And so I'd say that's the answer to the second part of your question. You know, how to connect with others is that you can't force it. You know, if you think you've come away from your individual work on the land with an idea of how things should be, or you think you have an answer, or you think you have a solution, or you think you have a set of tasks that you're going to do that's going to be helpful, or you've learned something and you think, oh, everybody should know this. Everybody should know this. Everybody should think like this. If everybody thought like this, the world would be a better place. I'm going to make change. I'm going to be the change I want to see in the world. You're an idiot, you know, because everything you've learned from, you know, that flow state and that emergence that you've experienced within yourself and within that system, you know, from being part of that system, you've destroyed it right there, you know. And you have to interact with the wider community and everyone in the world in the same way as you do when you're walking country. And you're basically fostering the conditions for emergence and following that and allowing that to transform you. That's all you can do. If you think you have a plan for changing the world or finding a solution to the problems of the world, you're an idiot. It doesn't work. You can't design these things, you know. You have to allow them, and coming into a community or allowing a community to coalesce around a basin of attraction or whatever, that's a good thing. But the minute someone tries to like start leading that, like, or being a thought leader, or like some kind of intellectual on a pedestal, or some kind of boss for that, it's just ridiculous. People invite me all the time to become part of these new little networks, or fucking what they call them, like, oh, they you know, like an activist group, or a network that's going to make change in the world or whatever. And if they start out with a whole heap of really good people coming together and just pinging off each other, and it's really generative and amazing, and you start to see transformations happen, you know. And then all of a sudden you get an email from some self-appointed committee within it who's decided to organize it all, and these are the dates, and this is what we're going to do, and you know, and this is the treasurer, and this is the secretary. It's finished. It's finished. I've seen like 5 of them like rise and fall this year. 5 of them I've been involved with reluctantly. As soon as you give it a name, and it's finished. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you how Indigenous thinking can save the world is your byline. Was that the publisher then?
Yeah, that's not my byline.
Yeah, I thought so.
You know the chapter Forever Ltd, Forever Limited? Yeah, that was my title, was Forever Ltd. And that was, you know, which is not good. I mean, it takes too long to explain that. No one understands what that means. No one's going to buy a book called Forever Ltd, but that was the point. It was like, I don't want to name it. And that title itself was sort of, it was trying to get across the idea that as soon as you name something, it's finished. It's corporatized, it's branded, and it's stuffed. So I was trying to ironically do that. And so I only had the goal of connecting with a few hundred people through the book who might read it. And, you know, just because I can manage a few hundred relationships. But anyway, it kind of went the other way, and it went how Indigenous thinking could save the world, you know, at a time when there's a crisis of meaning and people are obsessed with sense making, and they're looking anywhere and considering weird stuff. So it's ended up, you know, suddenly there's, you know, 100,000 relationships that I just can't manage at all. Yeah. So I'm doing the podcast because that's the new campfire, and I can at least, you know, superficially touch base with people. So I apologize to that for anyone who's read the book, and there's a promise of a relationship there and of an ongoing dialogue that I assumed I'd be able to fulfill. And I just, yeah, I can't do it.
Oh, I'm personally really glad that you get to be here with us right now, and that book did find me and find a lot of us here. Albert, will you ask your question? And then Benjamin, if you want to tag in right after and add anything because you had a similar question, then go ahead, Albert.
Thank you so much for being here, Tyson. Your book was absolutely amazing. And one of the parts of it that really stood out for me, that I'm really intrigued by, was how you began your sense-making process, your cognitive process of thinking on a topic by crafting a tool, and then going through this whole process, and like each part of the tool will like represent some part of your thinking. So if you would be so gracious, could you maybe demonstrate or kind of like show how you go through that process? That would be amazing.
Yeah, I saw that question pop up, so I was thinking about how to do that. So I grabbed a couple of things. I don't know. So you find it in a lot of the basic visual images and communications of knowledge. You know, there's a circle and there's kind of a square or a diamond or a triangle kind of thing. Like you always see these things in a lot of the shapes for the symbology, you know. And it's kind of how carving goes as well. But so, I mean, you can see, and there's male and female energy stuff in there, and you probably can't really see it there. It's not a very good image, but so you can see that male kind of Orion constellation, you know, all around the world is called the hunter, you know, or the warrior, you know, and that's that kind of, you know, square or diamond shape happening there through that constellation. And then here on the other side, you've got them, you can see the more circular stuff, and that's kind of, that's a Seven Sisters story, the Pleiades constellation. So you kind of see this coming through. And I don't know, I've noticed this in that practice of carving. So there's that Orion one. It's hard to see. But yeah, so if you're doing a boomerang, so it's basically two things with a lot of the weapons. So doing the boomerang, both these, so this is a law stick here. And so that's obviously a round one, you know, a rounded object there. And so these both start out as logs, you know, they're just a log. And so for this one, you know, you basically start out, you know, chopping it there until you get that rounded or pointed end. But you see how I'm turning it?
Hmm.
You're just always turning it like that. And then you got it here and hold him like baby's head. And it's funny, it's like, I don't know, I'm never allowed to do this. It's hard because if I try and do it at work, there's all this OH&S shit going on, workplace health and safety things that are messing up my practice, and someone inevitably calls security or whatever. And it's hard in the city because people call the cops when you're sitting somewhere with an axe, like. But anyway, I've done them all, and I've managed not to die or be incarcerated for too long or anything yet. So that's pretty good. Anyway, yeah, so you're holding it like a little baby's head here, and you actually can't cut your fingers off doing that. And so you just keep turning it, and you're chipping away, and you're turning, and you do it all the way down like that, you know. And it's that circular motion. As you're doing it, you've got this sort of haptic cognition, this embodiment going in. I don't know. A lot of you probably know about the new materialism. That would be a way into thinking about this kind of distributed cognition where you have neural processes happening beyond your skull and actually into the tools and objects that you use, but then into the relationships with people, places, and entities all around you. You're kind of doing that, and you're working in these stories and these places. As you cut, you're cutting it into there. And so you're ending up, this is like a USB, like a memory stick, you know. You're encoding all the information into that. And then you might etch some designs in there that are like little mnemonic triggers for some of that information. Now I've done here, so that's a map of a place there that I've put in there. But this one's problematic because it's black wattle from a place where wattle is male, but I brought it down here and I've carved it on country where wattle is female. And so there's knowledge from elsewhere, and then there's knowledge from here in there. So I've got this really problematic law stick that Auntie had to flog me for, but not with yet. Yeah, oh, she's got her own sticks. So there's that one, there's that circle way with the carving, but then this one here is, this is cool. I haven't shared this with anyone yet, these things. This one, and I can't share too much because it's very much, it's male activity, and you know, it can make a woman sick, like seeing me do this. Yeah. And not just a woman, like any menstruating organism can get sick from watching me. If I was actually carving, could do this, could get sick. Anyway, so I like this one. It's a log, and you cut it like that first on that angle. So you're making a point all the way along there, and then you do it on the other side. So what you end up with in the cross section is kind of a diamond shape carved out of the log, and then you cut off those sides of the diamond, and it's still thick then. So you do it again. You basically keep making a diamond shape, and then you cut the ridges off that sort of landscape of the wood. You bring it flatter until it comes flat like this, you know. So this one is it's a very different way of cutting. So you're encoding a really different kind of knowledge and a different sort of way of thinking, you know, into that wood. You know, and all the different carvings have different ways. So a lot of the things I might make out of bark, like a shield or a kulamon or something like that. And then a wooden shield, that's a different way of cutting as well. So it's different kinds of thinking that are going into there, but then different stories of place from where the wood comes from. Yeah, and where you've been walking and working, and where those, and what stories come in there. So like each one is a chapter in the book. So this one is really trying to look at the problematic idea of holistic, which is one of those words that's overused and known little understood, so this was that chapter, Lemonade for Headaches, where I look at medicine a bit, but I'm trying to look at, how it can be useful, like a useful intersection between indigenous knowledge and Western science is to try and help like mainstream researchers include the variables of time and place in their work. So there's a lot of studies where the results have not been replicable because the researchers ignored time and place, especially medicine research with plants. They ignore where the plants is harvested, and they ignore the season in which those plants are harvested. So they have variable results, and so they have inconclusive data. And so that's why, there is no evidence that fish oil is beneficial to your health, because they've not been able to have replicable results in the studies, because they don't pay attention to where they're catching the fish or what time of year those fish are harvested. So you might have one study that shows like this miraculous bloody effect on the kidneys, and then the next one will show no effect at all. Yeah. So, I try to help people out with including those variables of time and place in their research, and that's a valuable thing that can come from Aboriginal knowledge. It's part of the whole idea of the truth being in the aggregate of all the stories coming amongst each other, every model, and scientists know this, every model is wrong, but useful in some context. Every model, every theory is useful in the right context, but it is wrong. There isn't a unified theory. And some people are looking for that like a holy grail, because that's kind of the project of Westernism, is to find one unified narrative, one unified body of knowledge, one unified belief system, one unified language to rule them all. Is the project of Westernism. And it doesn't exist because, it's a pluralistic universe, it's a pluralistic reality. That's just the physics of the reality that we're living in. It's magical thinking to think there's a unified field theory or something like that. And it's a damaging process to, I don't know, the entire society and economic system and geopolitics and everything is built around that fantasy of that one unified good way, and that somehow the Anglosphere is going to be the repository of all knowledge, and that will be just unified into one monoculture, which is that's what the apocalypse looks like. So the English word for universe, is based on vertere, which means to become. So verse is like verso, like turned into, and then uni is one. So even the English word for the universe is this fantasy of turning everything into one monoculture, one unified system. And a unified system is like what everything looked like before the Big Bang. So nothing. There is no one. One doesn't exist. One is just zero. There's no such thing as one, because it's not possible to have anything existing in isolation without being in relation to something else, and then out to many other something else's. We only exist in relation to other things. And in different contexts, the meaning of that relation and that reality changes. I'm waffling on a bit.
Benjamin has a question about craftsmanship.
Subject. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for being here. And it's not quite a change of subject. It's related to your tool making. I had a question about how you learned, and specifically, how old were you? What's the process? And then looking forward, do you think that the craft that you learned is being passed on in a sustainable way?
Yeah, it is, but a lot of people think it's dead and gone. A lot of our own people think that too, that's a discontinuity. But it's happening in the same spaces where people are sneaking in at night. First Peoples are sneaking in at night to that place Tyson mentioned, and stealing their own ochre. It's happening like that. I'm finding that the culture is being held like quietly and privately by people of knowledge all over the place. They just don't talk to anthropologists, and they don't talk to the media. And you know, while they have things that they want to share with the world, like Old Man Juma in my book, you know, he has things that he wants to share with the world to sort of make a ritual action in spirit occur. You know, he wants to enact that, and so he's given me those things to pass on to the world. You know, these are just you know, they're not those things. They're not those deeper knowledges and understandings. You know, yeah, these are the sort of way of bringing people into that and gradually bringing people back into relation. You know, which kind of needs to occur. Hey, I saw a question pop up about gender there.
Yes, that was Hannah.
This is I mean, it's a really highly problematic thing. It's a big contested issue in our communities as well. And it's a very hard thing to talk about if you're worried about maintaining a brand or anything, or maintaining, I don't know, the ability to have a livelihood or anything like that, because there's pretty much not anything that anyone can say that a bunch of people aren't going to be upset about at the moment there, the same as everywhere else. Fortunately, I'm not really concerned with my brand, so I can talk up as much as I like about that. Unfortunately, I don't have a fixed opinion about it because unfortunately, because I am a fluid and adaptive sort of node in a complex adaptive system, you know, I'm constantly being transformed by new information and encounters that come in. So I guess my thinking around that changes every few days. So it'll never be the same. It's not the same as what I even wrote in that book today, but it'll probably be something completely different tomorrow. But I tell you someone good to read from the States if you're over there, from America anyway, Turtle Island, Kim Tallbear. Kim Tallbear has done a lot of really interesting work in decolonizing sexuality. And she challenges both heteronormative and homonormative ideologies around sexuality. And, you know, she even challenges that kind of trendy idea of two-spirit people that's come out of the United States. And she has a lot of really good knowledge about what sexuality was prior to European colonization. That's really interesting. She talks about it in terms of making kin, and that's the purpose of sex and sexuality. You know, it's kind of like you know, in the old days, if you were an ambassador, it was really different to what diplomats do today. There was quite a bit of sex involved because you had to establish those relations first. You know, and a lot of it wasn't constrained by the same kind of labels as it is today. And I think a lot of settlers, and particularly missionaries and stuff like that, were really like horrified by what they saw. And a lot of that, so most of it was not recorded. Actually, you know, almost there's only a few hints here and there of what was in terms of sexuality and sex and gender and gender roles and all that kind of thing. And there's a lot of misapprehensions. So everybody's taken on board the mythology of, you know, men were the hunters and women were the gatherers. That's kind of a universally unchallenged assumption that a lot of science and psychology and governance, everything, you know, is based on that idea. And it's kind of bullshit. And I think if you really look into it, you'll see, you know, like I mentioned, that that Neanderthal men and women had the same fracture patterns in their skeletal remains, which is really a really important thing. They just noted that, you know, in the studies, but they didn't like draw any conclusions from that, because I think it would unravel pretty much all of, you know, civilization and society as we know it, to acknowledge that women were bloody hunting. Women in Europe were hunting megafauna, bros. They were doing it the same way as the men were, you know. Yeah, I like, you know, they can acknowledge that Neanderthals were a bit more advanced than we thought, you know, because like, especially after they found out that most Europeans have Neanderthal DNA, then they discovered that, oh, actually they had a really advanced and sophisticated culture. Oh yeah, Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon had a 10% bigger brain than modern humans. That's huge. So they're able to acknowledge all that, but they couldn't revise the gender role thing. You know, that's like, you know, the entire like civilization is built on, you know, the subjugation, you know, just by accident of birth of half the population. That's how civilizations work. There isn't a matriarchal civilization. That's never existed. You know, matriarchies are what happens outside of a civilized, controlled. Civilization is patriarchal. It's necessarily patriarchal because you have to separate from the mother in order to become this domesticated, insane beast who can keep eating itself. You know, you have to separate from the mother, deny the mother, hate the mother, be hostile to the mother. And these cities that we live in now, they're all hostile to mothers particularly, and certainly to women, you know. And I don't care what anyone says, it's a terrible place to be a woman. I often ask men, you know, would you be a woman? Like, you know, like, especially when men are telling me that everything's just equal and they don't know what women are whinging about. I say, well, would you be a woman? Come on, seriously. I can straight up right now, would you be a woman? And they always say no. And I'm like, right. So you know what's going on. You know, you wouldn't want to subject yourself to that. You know, there's it's just horrific. Most of the women I know like live in fear. I mean, they have really good mechanisms for dealing with it. And most are pretty kind of happy. And I don't know where they get that strength from to be that, you know, but it's in fear. And they don't have the same, man, I used to have this, this man used to follow me home from work. Like I'd knock off work and I'd go home, and every day he'd be following me in his car and like vigorously masturbating while he looked at me. Like, so he'd park, you know, 100 meters off, and he'd watch me walking, and like the whole car would be shaking. And that happened every day. It was just a normal part of my day. I never once felt unsafe. One day he didn't show up, and they're like, oh, where's that fella gone? Then the next day he shows up and he's there again, and the car's just sort of forlornly rocking. And so I walked up to the car and I said, oh, I missed you yesterday, bro. I was like, are you okay? What's happened? And he goes, oh, my dad died. And, you know, I'm upset. I'm like, oh, can I do anything for you, bros? That's terrible. You know, can I help you? He said, oh, can you wear the white t-shirt tomorrow? And I'm like, yeah, bros, I can do that for you. You know, it's just not a threat. But if I was a female, like, there's a really good chance, like at least 1 in 10, that guy's going to try and kill me. You know, but I don't have to have any fear of that, and not because I'm big and strong. It's just, you know, anyway, I don't know. It's just a really crappy setup, and that's the civilized relation between men and women, and I don't like it, and nobody particularly likes it. So, you know, I don't want to participate in that. How about you? Anybody else want to participate in that anymore? All the women I know feel incredibly grateful to have been born a woman in this lifetime. Someone's just said, yeah.
Anna, did you have any follow-up question?
Yeah, I was particularly curious onto how these feminine and masculine concepts map onto the items that you showed us. And I think you mentioned a dye as well that's viewed differently in two different cultures. So I was wondering if you could speak to that, but if you feel it has been covered enough, then that's okay too.
Yeah. I'm just, I'm creating these things within the traditions that I belong to, and within the ideas that, the knowledge that's been passed to me along that. And I guess it's dealing with female and male energies. And of course, everybody's got a bit of both in different sort of percentages in their being. And that's fluid because that can change throughout your life, and it does change throughout everybody's life. Because if you make it through to extreme old age, to elderhood, the women grow beards in old age and the men grow tits. There is a and there's all your hormone levels change when you get older. So throughout your life, there is a shift in that masculine and feminine energy. So that's why elders are able to do different things, and they have their own kind of secret business that they do together. They don't particularly share with everybody else because they're working with a very different sort of admixture of men's business and women's business as they go along to those really high levels of knowledge. But the rest of us will be sitting from moment to moment in, with male energy in our belly or female energy in our belly. And, there's only certain ways that those things can come alongside each other productively or safely. So there's lots of community ritual activity and, man and woman together, things that we do. And all of the ritual and knowledge and practice around children and child rearing, these are all points of intersection where those energies can come together. But there's a lot of things that they have to be separate, because a man's energy is what's just often described to in Aboriginal cultures as sour, like it's a bitter and sour energy. And that kind of, like, a lot of people hearing that from the first time goes, yeah, that's true. It's a different smell, it's a different chemistry, to the spirit of that. And then whereas women's energy is different. It's sweet, and it's unctuous, and it's a different kind of energy. And the problem with bringing those together in the wrong way and in the wrong contexts culturally is that men's energy can sour a woman's energy, and a woman's energy can often completely destroy a male's energy as well. So it's important it's important to maintain male and female spaces, where activities can be done that aren't going to make people sick. Yeah, but at the same time, it's not every single person is completely one thing or the other thing. There's a lot of interesting stuff that happens in the in-between, and that's pretty much a foundational concept of Indigenous cultures, as that everything good happens in the in-between, in that invisible relational space. And some people are born to just inhabit that space, and those are sacred people, and special people. They got a special purpose, and they have their own business, and their own ways of working that spirit that are absolutely essential to the whole community. A lot of this stuff has been lost, and there's a lot of people doing the good work of finding their way back to that and recovering that lore. And like I said, on Turtle Island, Kim Tallbear is the best I've seen for that. Really worth listening to any of her lectures that you can find, or reading any of her papers. You'll love that stuff.
We are 2 minutes beyond the hour. Tyson, do you have time for any more questions, or must we let you go?
Yeah, I don't think. Hang on, let me check my calendar, but I can go over a bit. Yeah, don't be rushing the yarn. It's all right. I've allowed until midday for this, so you can go a bit more if you like.
All right. Well, that would be wonderful. There are questions still rolling in. Nicholas, I would love for you to ask whichever of your questions is most alive to you now.
Can you guys hear me?
Hear you.
It doesn't have to be a question either. Like sometimes people just want to say something and then they have to reframe it as a question.
Nice.
Like if you just want to say something, like just say it. Yeah.
So Tyson, Tyson's, thank you for hosting, for being here and giving such an interesting talk. My disclaimer is that I haven't read your book yet. It's arriving in 2 days. But this you may have something to say about this, or maybe you've addressed it in your book already. So a return to an indigenous worldview has come into vogue as an alternative future to techno-utopian hypercapitalism in post-capitalist circles, notably in Eisenstein's work, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Andreas Weber, and so on. It's also been subverted and consumerized as a trope by capital in films and series like Avatar, Altered Carbon, and wealthy retreats to eco-villages. In Mark Fisher's essay, Terminator versus Avatar, he argues that while we may wish to disavow capitalism by embracing our true primitive selves, his words, victimized by the military-industrial complex, he claims that there are no primitive societies anymore. And triumphing a nostalgic return to the past is a betrayal of our ability to think alternate futures to capitalist realism. Thus, Avatar, the idea of a return to Mother Earth, is a nostalgic moral critique of capitalism that is dead in the water because its gaze is fixed on the past and it has no techno-political teeth to rival hegemonic neoliberalism's Terminator or Moloch in the present. So those are contentious headwinds, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about this.
So many thoughts. Look, you can't return to primitivism. You can't return to a primitivism that has never existed. It's a myth. I mean, primitive cultures have never existed. They don't exist. They've never existed. So the idea of returning to them is insane. You know, that human cultures have been complex, adaptive. We've been making meaning for 1 million years, like symbolic reasoning. And you might say, what? I thought it was just 10,000, but no, this Homo erectus was doing designs, symbolic designs, abstract designs on shells. And they found those shells 1 million years old. So for at least 1 million years, I would say even more, you know, our custodial species has been making meaning, you know, through symbolic reasoning, you know, and this is very complex cultures. So if you're, you know, projecting onto the past like that anthropologist with the Yanomami Indians saying, well, they, even though they've reported their genealogies to me, they couldn't possibly know their genealogies because they're primitive. Only my computer can know their genealogies. It's just insane. It's this, you know, it's like those, you know, the paleontologists, no, the archaeologists for a long time, they were finding these round discs like bone or stone or whatever. They're finding these round discs with notches around the outside, and always around like, you know, 28, 31, you know, around that kind of number. And they were finding them all over the place, you know, all around the world, like not just from one culture. They were finding those, and what the hell are these? Oh, we'll never know what these are, you know, for many decades, until finally there was a female archaeologist who went, I know what that is. I got one in my purse right now. right? This is like women tracking their cycle to control their fertility. What the fuck? I mean, it's really simple, you know. I mean, this idea of these primitive, savage, bloody animal people walking around, monkeys, you know, with clubs, is just insane. And the idea of a return to that is insane. And there's a really important phenomenon to acknowledge, which is white atavism. And it's this idea of, sort of white people, you know, settlers, basically, modern civilized people, domesticated people, trying to reclaim some kind of indigeneity in the past and bring it forward to the present, in a way where they'll be able to keep all of their shit. Like they want to be able to, it's like, yeah, I want to become, I want to become that neo-primitive person so that I can regain some authenticity and, you know, a basic way of living in the world that is human. But I want to keep all my stolen resources.
It's like
stolen land. I want to keep this land as capital, and all of the, you know, blood-soaked resources and bank accounts and quad bikes and 3 houses and everything. I want to be able to keep all that, but be this indigenous being. So yeah, that there's that white atavism going on, and I guess there's another danger with that, which is to generalize that out to everybody who's genuinely seeking to find the fragments of their humanity and build from the pattern that they find there to reclaim, you know, a way of being human that is not infected by this algorithm of destruction, which is not in our DNA. We're not some white fantasy of Yanomami Indians just struggling and fighting each other in endless, horrific violence until we all die and destroy the planet. There's this idea that, oh, human beings are naturally just horrific things that wreck the world around us. That's bullshit. And people who are looking to try and recover some way of being human that is real and that actually occupies our ecological niche and our role as a custodial species on the planet, that's a different thing altogether. And I don't like it when people try and lump those genuine seekers in with white atavists, you know, who are really just trying to make a cultural arc where they can keep all of their stolen goods and carry it across into the next world. Yeah.
That the white atavism that you described there sounds like a match made in hell between Rousseau's State of Nature and the MAGA, like Make America Great Again play.
Yeah.
It's like a mishmash of both, and trying to keep the moral purity of one and the stolen wealth of the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
hey, Nicholas, are you Jewish or Israeli or something like that?
I'm half Jewish, half Catholic. So
yeah. So I was looking at, well, which half, bros? Anyway, I was just thinking about the cultural and economic success of the Jewish diaspora everywhere. I mean, you know, and Israel aside, because that's a different beast, completely. But in the diaspora, all everywhere around the world, just absolutely amazing. So this is a community, it has no government funding, it has no, you know, basically it's a community that's looking after itself. It's a community that has its own internal economy. You know, the kids finish school in the daytime, you know, in the host country, and then they go to, you know, Hebrew school at night. And that Hebrew school is not paid for by the government. That's its own community is throwing in. And, you know, so basically you've got a community that's held itself together and maintained an ancient tradition with absolutely no problem, at the same time as mastering, you know, the cultures and languages of whatever host country they're in, you know, and maintaining these amazing communities just everywhere with huge amounts of cultural success, you know. So I don't know, this idea that there are no cultures left in the world, you know, there are no cultural traditions left. I mean, that you can see the continuity there of Jewish culture everywhere you go in the world. You know, and you can see the same kinds of continuities everywhere else. A lot of us as indigenous people, I think, could learn a lot from the Jews in terms of, you know, stabilizing and being able to self-support and separate our culture from the mainstream, but just, you know, keep it there. But then also be able to, you know, distribute our gifts to the culture as well. So, you know, I mean, where would we be without Seinfeld? So you've got this culture producing all these amazing things that everybody wants, and that's the relation, you know, that we have. And I guess, you know, and there's no particular plan for it. I think people like to project plans, like the protocols of the elders of Zion, and assume that there has to be a plan. But I don't see that in Jewish culture. I see this, you know, it's just that idea of fostering the conditions for emergence. You know, people are behaving and living in the right way, and good things come out of that. And I guess that's a human way to be.
If there's a plan for a kind of universal Jewish cabal to manipulate global economies, I'm not in on it.
Yeah, but that's just it. I think the Jewish culture is a perfect example of, you know, of not having a plan, you know, but having an ethical pattern that is followed. And then, you know, the good things emerge from that, you know. Yeah, it's just a collective sort of supportive, you know, a group of all very different individuals all together, just allowing, you know, creativity to emerge. Allowing things to emerge, allowing, you know, governance patterns and things like that to happen. I mean, that's what I see in the diaspora. That's not what I see in Israel. That's a different thing, like I said, but that's what I see in the diaspora. And I think that, like the Jewish diaspora, is a pretty damn good model of how to be in really, and how to deal with uncertainty, and not just survive it, but thrive and be as happy as hell. So I don't know any miserable Jews. Like, every Jew I've ever met's been like, been really smart and really happy. And yeah, even when they're fasting. I was happy, like when I fasted with my Jewish mates, like I did that big long one, you know, and I was miserable as shit, but they were all really happy.
Thanks for your answer, Tyson. I have a lot to say, but I don't want to monopolize here. So back to you, Tyson Flows.
Thank you. There's a few questions in here getting lots of upvotes, but I'm just going to go to the most recent one right now, and that is Darren's question. And then after that, would love to go to Christian and Thomas if we have time. So Darren.
Oh, hey, hi, Tyson. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so some of us were just on a call a couple hours ago where we were talking about, you know, Greek dialogue and sort of some ideas that they had about, you know, how to relate to each other so that you could have a good conversation, you know, a conversation that sort of is fruitful or leads to us being able to do things together that we couldn't do separately. I know, you know, in your book, you talk a lot about, you know, yarning, about how you get together with people and you want to have this, it's kind of like conversation, it's kind of like storytelling, it's kind of like experimental storytelling where you figure out what's true. And so I was just curious, you know, like when you hear about the Greeks, do you just think, oh, hey, they were just getting, those Greek dudes, they were just yarning? Or is it different? Or how would you compare the two? What do we not get about it?
Well, I think the only difference is abstraction. So in the Greek Stoa, a lot of what was discussed was abstracted and sort of not sitting within a context, a living context. So it was that birth of reductionism, you know, that idea of, okay, so for example, being able to separate the concepts. So inventing a word for nature and separating that from the word for society, which so in indigenous cultures and in most human cultures prior to that, the invention of the Stoa, prior to those Greek yarns, you know, there was no separate concept for nature or environment, you know. So that was, I'd say that's the only difference. But for the rest of it, in the form and shape of it, I think there's a lot of similarities, you know, particularly in just the flow of it, and that kind of respect, and the idea that the truth could be found in the aggregate, and that there wasn't this idea of, with a lot of the traditions anyway, because there were different schools of thought, of course, over time and even at the same time. This idea that, you know, you weren't there to dominate through discussion and to have your story come out on top and for yours to become the dominant narrative. You know, they weren't seeking a dominant narrative. They were seeking not even a consensus, but they were kind of seeking a pluralistic aggregate of truth, where, you know, the outliers on the bell curve are interesting, and that story, you know, adds to the context of the rest of the bell. You know what I mean? But rather than just focusing exclusively on the majority opinion, or even more dangerously, just focusing on the outlier stories, which is always dangerous. Yeah, that they were able to try and form this holistic view of all the stories together, and to find sort of a shape of the truth within that. You know, you do that, but we don't say that because there's no word for truth. You know, like, there aren't these abstracts, so we've never had to separate out all these ideas and talk about them, because they just are. That's part of the contextual foundation of the whole yarn in the first place. So you're coming to the yarn, and 90% of it is just context that doesn't even need to be said. So you can have quite an economy of words, you know. And you don't have to listen like this here. There's where I'm talking for like bloody 8 or 10 minutes at a time straight. You know, it doesn't have to happen. There's a lot of back and forth, you know, and unless like there's an old person telling a long story or something, then you don't have that. But then them old people only tell the old story, like the entire story, you know, in a really specific genre that's, you know, telling a story to children. Because most of the time you only get a fragment of the story that's relevant to a place or a context, or, you know, you'll only hear part of the story. And it'll be, so you receive that story out of order over a number of years in different contexts, rather than being told from start to finish in that way. You know, so I guess everything's kind of different. I don't know. And that, you know, we impose these time structures, but also spatial structures. I mean, now a lot of people think if you're sitting in a circle, you're doing it, but you're not. You're just turning a straight line into a circle. You know, you start with one person, then everybody gets their turn with the talking stick as it goes around. And everybody in order just monologues while everybody has to listen to them. That's not yarning either. Yeah, it's hard to describe even what yarning is.
Christian, would you like to ask your question? Christian, did you hear me? Let's go to Thomas.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about that.
Christian's here. All good.
Okay. What was my question? I had to write it a few times, so I should probably refer back to it rather than try to do it from memory. Okay. Is mythology something to be held in a purely allegorical way? Something to extract meaning from via analysis and then integrate it into one's worldview and your sense making, and then kind of like put in its place or discarded? Or is there something to be gained from an emotional commitment to a mythological story? Something like divine and sacred that you can like, it can be alive in you. Or yeah, it's a question of like how to balance, like relating to the divine through mythology while allowing for like pluralism at the level of, understanding what's going on, so to speak.
Well, look, mythology doesn't exist. And the divine doesn't exist, at least as a separate thing from everything else. What people are calling mythology now, or myths, all these sorts of things, all they are is it's just a model. It's a model of reality that's useful in some contexts. So that's when you fucking use it, like, it's like any other, is Newton, do you use Newton's physics? Like you do every day in a lot of the technology that you use, and it's a useful model of reality in some circumstances. But for this Zoom meeting to work, and for the relative time to happen as this signal's buzzing up to a satellite and then bouncing down into a million places around the globe at once, Newton, that wouldn't work. We wouldn't have this Zoom on the Newton model. We got to go to Einstein for a bit, which is also only useful in some contexts. It's useful to make the Zoom meeting work, to make the tech work. So that's the model for that. What people are calling myths and mythology are deeply layered things, and mostly people are only coming in at the folklore, children's fable level of the mythology. And that has a purpose. It's mostly just to put kids to sleep, God damn it, at night, because we need a minute to ourselves. Fuck. But the rest of the deep layers of mythology, they contain maps, memory, knowledge that are useful in contexts. They're useful in, there's parts of myths that are just for women or just for old women, and that they only apply, as a model in a situation, such as inducting a young woman into this area of reality or something like that. And that's what it's for. But it's also for medicine. It's also for this and that. There's whole universes of knowledge in there. And in every mythology, there's various models that are applicable to different contexts, but useless in other contexts. So why would you even look at it? But it's the same as everything else. There are, I guess you could think of a lot of engagement with myth and ritual as in terms of simulation, simulation and modeling that you do to try and predict how a system will behave and all that sort of stuff. It's the same thing. It's just like software, but it's software for the mind, not just your mind, but the mind of the sentient landscapes and contexts that you inhabit. Your mythology is just a handy bit of software for that. It's no big deal. It's just the same as everything else. It's a handy model or theory that you can apply to certain concepts. As soon as you elevate it to this goddamn spiritual thing of this, you've got to have this religious awe or something, or that's the place. This is the stuff where I take my moment to talk like this. This is my. Yeah, it's like, nah, that's not what it is. You just. Guess it's just a tool like anything else. Just engage with it. And you don't put it up there, but you don't put it down there either as something to denigrate. It's no more or less rigorous than any other body of knowledge or any other intellectual tool. Has its uses. Some people misuse it and become fucking gurus and stuff like this and just wreck everything. Some people establish ideologies based out of these mythologies and wreck everything. But that's coming back to that trap of going, I have the solution. I have the secret knowledge that you need. I've got it. Everybody should think like this. And then you get like, I don't know, a group of like the mean girls from high school clustering around you and following you and spreading that and bloody backing you up and teasing anybody who doesn't, or mobbing anybody who doesn't like parrot your idea. It's just insane. Like, I'm just so sick of ideologies and bloody belief systems and people's bloody solutions and tinkered little structures that they think, can somehow stand a test of time or have any application in this world. Just calm down. It's just a model. Use it when it's useful. Sorry, man, that was a long way to say that. And I know time's running out.
That was really good. Theodore, I would love for you to finish us off with your question.
Well, yeah, I can't resist the urge to look for secret knowledge. But in your book, you mentioned how rhyme and alliteration were great ways of disseminating knowledge. And one thing that stood out to me in the back of the book in your last chapter, and you also talked about it with Omajuma, is the 7 spirit families. So this is something I found through a rap song, actually. It's from Christoph Crane. He created a double album called Kairos, and he goes quite in depth about the 7 spirit families and the 7 constellations. And I was just wondering if you could expand on that more, because I've kind of been consumed by it.
It is, it's just a rabbit hole. It's a fractal rabbit hole, that one was. And you just, it's, yeah, you start to get a sense that we all, I mean, I've heard that explained as just, you know, just a universal pattern recognition thing, that humans all meaning the same way of the same sort of shapes. And so if there's a vague man shape of something in the sky, then everyone will see that as a man. But that's, I mean, that's bullshit again. Like you look at Orion, it's just basically a square in the sky that everybody goes, yeah, that's a dude. But not just any dude, that's a warrior or a hunter, like for everybody on the planet. And so you know that there's a common origin story, body of knowledge. You know that there's, or at least a hell of a big embassy going around, and a lot more exchange and a lot more ocean travel. Like we know that Homo erectus had seagoing vessels. Homo erectus, that's a long time ago, you know. And I mean, they're holding on to the out of Africa theory. That's why, like, every time there's a discovery, we get every year there's an announcement like, yeah, this archaeological evidence suggests that Aboriginal people have actually been here for more than 100,000 years. You know, but the record still says 60,000 or 60,000 plus. They can't move it on from that because the maths doesn't work for the out of Africa theory. Chances are, like, from everything that I keep looking at, I'm seeing there's a really good argument for people coming out of here, Australia, like our old people stories say, or, you know, what was, I mean, at a time when Australia wasn't even just Australia, it was just, you know, part of a big Asian sort of landmass. Yeah, chances are people actually came out from there, like modern humans. But then even this idea of modern humans is a bit of a misnomer, because, you know, modern humans is just a hybrid of 7 different bloods. And I guess you can look at those studies. You know, you've got your Homo florensis, Homo neanderthalis, you know, your Cro-Magnon and your Homo erectus and all, and then the Denisovans, and then something else. There's like 7 bloods. And, you know, the idea of all those families coming together again is kind of nice, you know. And yeah, Omajuma, that's basically the purpose of the book, is it's just a delivery system for, you know, this spiritual vaccine of his 6 symbols that have just, he wanted it to go out into the world. And so this is just a delivery system. There's just a bit of marketing and packaging around that in a book. People keep reading the book and saying it's changed them at the genetic level, which is so weird, because that's what he said would happen. He said this changed people's DNA. See, we've got to change the DNA, bring them 7 spirit families. And it's so weird, you know, like Jim Rutt said it changed his DNA. How random is that? So different people from all walks of life. I got women calling me up saying, like, My husband doesn't recognize my smell anymore. My smell changed after I read your book. You know, I've changed at the molecular and chemical level. I keep getting that feedback, and nobody can pinpoint which words are in the book that did that, and they keep looking for it in the words. Don't even look at the words. There's just like, there's 6 images in there from an old black wizard in Australia who's like just basically used me to cast a spell on the world to change everybody's DNA and bring everyone together. So, yeah, so I think we're all going to be recognizing those stars and those stories and find our way back to that. Or we're just all going to die. So, you know, but only one of those 2 things. Whichever way, we got to have a good laugh while we're doing it, I reckon.
Well, thank you for encouraging the good laughs here in this space, Tyson, and being generous with your time. And I really appreciate you just being here and sharing this space and time with us. Thank you, everybody.
Quick, I got to answer that question. Somebody said, "Is Old Man Juma embodied?" Like, yeah, he's a real dude, I think. You know, he's got a body and like a camper thing and everything, but I've never seen him sleep. But I was talking to him on the phone like yesterday, so he definitely exists in this reality, but probably a few different ones. He's one of them quantum people. Anyway, there's a photo. There's photos of him.
Oh wow.
Do you want me to show you a photo just before we leave?
Yeah, that would be awesome. You can drop it probably in the chat.
See if I got one here. Somewhere for the launch. There was pictures. Where is it? Man, I'm sorry. This is taking. Here it is.
That's all right.
I got it. Now I've just got to do this sharey screeny thing.
I'll make you host. I hope it's not that guy that follows you in the car though secretly.
Man, anyone's welcome to follow me in the car if they need to. It's fine.
You got host access.
Oh, cool. Thanks, man. I'm just going to do a share screen. And I'll just leave you with a picture. So he does exist. There's my little daughter, Onyx. That's me. There's an old man there. Yeah, cheeky, lovely, and terrifying human being. All right.
Thank you, Tyson.
No worries. I'll see you later.
All right. And tomorrow, everybody, and at the Stoa is a We Space Communitas type practice.